The golden lights of the Grand Hotel ballroom sparkled like stars against the crystal chandeliers. Tonight was the biggest charity event of the year in Vienna, and everyone who mattered was there. Men in expensive suits chatted about business deals, while women in designer gowns sipped champagne and admired each other's jewelry. At the center of it all stood a magnificent black grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the room. This wasn't just any piano. It was a rare Steinway worth more than most people's houses. Tonight, it would be played by Viktor Petrov, the famous pianist whose concerts sold out within minutes across the world. Viktor had just finished his first performance of the evening. The crowd had given him a standing ovation, as they always did. He was used to the praise, the admiration, the way people's eyes lit up when they met him. At 35, he had everything: fame, fortune, and talent that seemed to flow from his fingers like magic. As Viktor walked through the crowd during intermission, people reached out to shake his hand and tell him how wonderful his playing was. He smiled and nodded, accepting their compliments like a king receiving gifts from his subjects. His agent walked beside him, whispering about upcoming concerts and recording deals. That's when Viktor noticed her. In the far corner of the ballroom, almost hidden behind a marble pillar, sat an old woman. She looked completely out of place among all the wealthy guests. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a plain black dress that had seen better days. Her shoes were old but clean, polished carefully despite their worn appearance. But what caught Viktor's attention wasn't how different she looked from everyone else. It was the way she was staring at the piano. Her eyes were fixed on the instrument with a look he rarely saw anymore: pure love and longing. Most people at these events barely paid attention to the music. They came to be seen, to network, to show off their expensive clothes. But this woman was different. She sat perfectly still, as if the piano was calling to her. "Who is that?" Viktor asked his agent, nodding toward the woman. His agent glanced over and shrugged. "Probably one of the hotel staff. Sometimes they let them watch from the back during events like this." "Don't worry about it." Viktor studied the woman more closely. She had to be in her 70s, maybe older. Her hands rested in her lap, and he noticed they were the hands of someone who had worked hard her whole life. But there was something else about them, something that made him curious. A mischievous idea began to form in Viktor's mind. He was known for his wit and humor, especially when it came to entertaining his wealthy audience. What if he could give them a little show? Something to make them laugh and remember this evening. "Excuse me for a moment," Viktor said to the group of admirers surrounding him. He walked across the room toward the old woman, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. Despite her simple appearance, there was something dignified about her posture. She sat with her back straight, her chin lifted slightly as if she had been taught proper manners long ago. When she noticed him approaching, her eyes widened with surprise. "Good evening," Viktor said with a charming smile. "I'm Viktor Petrov." The woman nodded politely. "I know who you are," she said quietly. Her English was good, but there was an accent he couldn't quite place. "Your playing is beautiful." "Thank you," Viktor replied. "I couldn't help but notice how intently you were watching the piano." "Do you play?" The woman hesitated for a moment. I used to," she said softly. By now, Viktor's little expedition had caught the attention of other guests. They began to gather around, curious about what the famous pianist was doing talking to this ordinary-looking woman. Viktor could feel their eyes on him, waiting for something entertaining to happen. "Used to?" Viktor said, raising his voice slightly so the growing crowd could hear. "Well, you know what they say, it's like riding a bicycle. Once you learn, you never really forget." Some people in the crowd chuckled. Viktor felt encouraged by their response. "In fact," he continued, his voice growing more confident, "I bet you could still play something right now. What do you think, everyone? Should we give our friend here a chance to show us what she remembers?" The crowd murmured with interest. Some looked uncomfortable with the situation, but others seemed amused by the idea. Viktor basked in their attention, feeling clever for coming up with such spontaneous entertainment. The old woman looked around at all the faces staring at her. Her cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. "Oh no, I couldn't," she said, shaking her head. "It's been so long, and this is such a fancy event." "Come now," Viktor pressed, his tone playful but insistent. "Don't be modest. I'm sure these lovely people would enjoy hearing what you can do. Besides, when will you get another chance to play a piano like this? He gestured grandly toward the Steinway, and the crowd turned to look at it. When they looked back, Victor continued his performance. I tell you what, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. If you can play something, anything at all, I'll personally make sure you get a front row seat to my next concert. How's that for a deal? The crowd laughed and applauded at his generous offer. Victor felt pleased with himself. He was giving this old woman a moment in the spotlight, a story she could tell her grandchildren. Sure, she would probably embarrass herself, but it would be harmless fun. And if she actually managed to play a simple tune, well, that would be even more entertaining. The woman looked at Victor with an expression he couldn't quite read. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Was it sadness? Anger or something else entirely? You really want me to play? She asked quietly. Absolutely, Victor exclaimed. Everyone wants to hear what you can do. Don't you, everyone? The crowd responded with encouraging murmurs and gentle applause. Some people held up their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be an amusing moment to share on social media later. The old woman stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. As she walked toward the piano, Victor felt a surge of satisfaction. This was going perfectly. His audience was entertained, and he was the star of his own little drama. But as the woman approached the piano bench, something strange happened. Her step became more confident, more purposeful. She moved with a grace that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, as if the piano was awakening something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Victor watched from a few feet away, still smiling, still expecting to see a sweet old lady struggle through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or maybe a simple church hymn. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to see what would happen next. The woman reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, her hand resting gently on its polished surface. She closed her eyes briefly, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then she sat down on the bench and began to adjust it to the right height. Victor noticed that she knew exactly how to position herself, how to set the bench for optimal playing. But he pushed the thought aside. Lots of people knew the basics of piano setup, even if they couldn't actually play well. The ballroom fell silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. Everyone was waiting to see what this unexpected performer would do. The old woman placed her hands above the keys, her fingers curved in perfect form. For just a second, she looked out at the crowd of expectant faces. Then her eyes found Victor's, and in that moment he saw something that made his confident smile falter just slightly. It was the look of someone who had a secret, a very big secret. The silence in the ballroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every eye was focused on the old woman sitting at the piano bench. Her hands hovered above the keys like birds about to take flight. Even the waiters had stopped moving, frozen with their trays half raised, not wanting to make a sound. Victor stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, still wearing that confident smile. He was already planning what he would say after she finished playing her simple little tune. Maybe something witty about how music brings out the child in all of us. His audience would love that. The woman's fingers were perfectly curved above the keys. Victor noticed this detail but didn't think much of it. Probably learned it in some basic piano lessons years ago, he thought. Lots of people knew the proper hand position even if they couldn't play anything complicated. But then something unexpected happened. The woman's entire posture began to change. Her shoulders, which had been slightly hunched forward like someone carrying the weight of many years, straightened. Her back became perfectly erect, not stiff but poised like a dancer about to perform. Her chin lifted just slightly, and suddenly she looked taller, more commanding. Victor's smile wavered just a tiny bit. There was something different about her now, something he hadn't noticed before. The way she held herself reminded him of something, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. In the crowd, people were starting to hold up their phones. This would make a great video to share later, the famous Victor Petrov giving an old lady her moment of fame. Some guests were already typing captions in their heads. You won't believe what happened at the charity gala tonight. The woman closed her eyes for a moment as if she was listening to music that only she could hear. Her breathing became deeper, more controlled. When she opened her eyes again, they seemed different somehow, clearer, more focused, like someone who had just remembered something very important. Victor glanced around at his audience. They were getting restless, waiting for the show to begin. A few people were whispering to each other, probably making jokes about what they expected to hear. He caught the eye of his agent, who was shaking his head slightly as if to say, "I can't believe you're doing this." But Victor was committed now. He had set this whole thing in motion and there was no backing down. Besides, it would all be over in a minute or two, and then everyone would have a good laugh. The woman placed her right foot on the sustain pedal, testing it gently. Victor noticed that she knew exactly where to find it without looking down. Again, he pushed the thought away. Basic piano knowledge, nothing more. Then her hands descended to the keys. The first chord that rang out across the ballroom was nothing like what Victor had expected. It wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or Happy Birthday. It was rich, full, and perfectly balanced. The sound filled the room with a warmth that made everyone stop breathing for a moment. Victor's confident expression began to crack. That chord was too clean, too precise. It spoke of years of training, of muscle memory that hadn't been touched in a long time but was still there, waiting. The woman began to play what Victor recognized immediately as Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But this wasn't some amateur's attempt at a famous piece. From the very first notes, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. Her left hand moved across the bass notes with fluid grace, creating a foundation that was both solid and flexible. Her right hand began the melody, and the sound that came from the piano was pure poetry. Each note was perfectly placed, not just technically correct, but emotionally right. Victor felt his mouth fall open slightly. This wasn't possible. This old woman, this person he had picked out of the crowd as a joke, was playing Chopin like someone who truly understood the music. Not just the notes on the page, but the soul behind them. The crowd had gone completely silent now. The whispers and giggles had died away, replaced by something much more powerful. People were actually listening, really listening. Many of them for the first time all evening. As the woman continued to play, Victor noticed more details that made his stomach tighten with growing realization. Her fingering was flawless, moving from chord to chord with an efficiency that spoke of decades of practice. Her use of the pedal was subtle and sophisticated, creating layers of sound that most amateur players never even thought about. But it was more than just technical skill. There was something in her playing that Victor, for all his fame and training, rarely achieved in his own performances. There was pain in the music, yes, but also hope. There was loss, but also beauty. It was as if she was telling a story with every note, sharing something deeply personal with everyone in the room. Victor looked around at his audience. The smug smiles had disappeared from their faces. Instead, he saw something he wasn't used to seeing at these fancy events: genuine emotion. A woman near the front had tears in her eyes. An older gentleman was nodding slowly, as if the music was speaking directly to him. The woman's hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence. Victor could see that she was warming up, remembering not just how to play but how it felt to truly make music. There was a glow in her face now, a kind of joy that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. As she moved into the more complex middle section of the Nocturne, Victor felt a cold realization washing over him. This woman wasn't just someone who used to play piano as a hobby. This was someone who had lived and breathed music, someone who had dedicated years of her life to mastering the instrument. The melody soared and dipped, painting pictures in the air above the piano. Victor found himself getting lost in the music despite his growing embarrassment. She was playing with a level of expression that he had to work hard to achieve in his own performances. For her, it seemed to flow naturally, as if the piano was simply an extension of her own voice. A man in the crowd pulled out his phone and started recording, but not to make fun. He was capturing something beautiful, something unexpected and real. Others followed his example, but their faces were serious now, reverent. Victor's agent had moved closer, his expression changing from annoyance to amazement. He leaned over to Victor and whispered, "Do you know who this is?" But Victor couldn't answer. He was too busy watching his whole evening, his moment of superior entertainment at someone else's expense, crumble around him. This woman wasn't his victim. She was something else entirely. The music built to a climactic moment, the melody singing out above the accompaniment with a beauty that made the crystal chandeliers seem to sparkle brighter. The woman's entire being seemed focused on the piano, as if nothing else in the world existed. Victor realized that everyone in the room was holding their breath. The music had transported them all to a different place, somewhere deeper and more honest than the glittering surface of their charity gala. As the nocturne began to move toward its gentle conclusion, Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in years: humility. This woman, whom he had chosen as the target of his casual cruelty, was teaching him something about music that he had forgotten in all his years of fame and success. She was reminding him why he had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. The last notes of the nocturne hung in the air like a prayer, beautiful and haunting. Then slowly the woman's hands lifted from the keys. The silence that followed was profound. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The last notes of the Chopin nocturne seemed to hang in the air above the piano like invisible golden threads, still vibrating in everyone's hearts. Then, like a dam bursting, the applause began. It started with one person clapping slowly, deliberately. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers above. People weren't just clapping, they were standing, shouting, some wiping tears from their eyes. The old woman sat at the piano bench, her hands now resting quietly in her lap. She looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. For a moment she seemed lost, like someone waking up from a beautiful dream. Victor stood frozen in place, his face pale. The confident smile had completely disappeared. His mouth was slightly open and his hands hung uselessly at his sides. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something impossible. The applause went on and on. A woman in a sparkling blue dress was openly crying, not caring that her makeup was running down her cheeks. A distinguished gentleman with gray hair was shaking his head in amazement, muttering, "Incredible, absolutely incredible," under his breath. Victor's agent pushed through the crowd toward him. "Victor," he whispered urgently, "do you have any idea who that is?" But Victor couldn't answer. He was staring at the woman with a mixture of awe and horror. The joke he had planned, the little moment of entertainment at her expense, had completely backfired. Instead of embarrassing her, he had revealed something extraordinary. And in doing so, he had exposed his own arrogance for everyone to see. The woman finally stood up from the piano bench. As she did, her posture seemed to shift again. The regal bearing that had emerged during her performance began to fade, replaced by the humble, almost apologetic stance she had shown before. It was as if she was trying to make herself small again, to disappear back into the shadows where she felt she belonged. But the crowd wouldn't let her. They pressed closer, still applauding, still calling out their amazement and gratitude. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others were asking questions. "Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that? Why aren't you famous?" Victor knew he had to do something. This was his event, his audience, and somehow he had lost control of the entire situation. He stepped forward, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice not quite as steady as usual. That was truly remarkable." The woman looked at him with those same eyes that had held such mystery before she played. Up close now, Victor could see more details about her face. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of years of both laughter and sorrow. Her hands, which had just created such magic on the piano keys, showed the signs of hard work, calluses and small scars that hadn't come from piano playing. "I think," Victor continued, struggling to find the right words, "we would all like to know more about you. Would you mind telling us your name?" The woman hesitated. The spotlight was making her uncomfortable. Victor could see that. She glanced around at all the expectant faces, then back at him. "My name is Anna," she said quietly, her accent more noticeable now. "Anna Kowalski." "And where did you learn to play like that, Anna?" Victor asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. Anna looked down at her hands, then back up at the crowd. "I studied at the Warsaw Conservatory," she said simply. "A long time ago." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Warsaw Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Only the most talented students were accepted there. Victor felt his stomach drop. "The Warsaw Conservatory," he repeated. "And after you graduated?" Anna's expression grew distant, as if she was looking back through years of memories. "I performed with several orchestras in Poland. I had my own recital series in Warsaw, Krakow, and other cities. I was preparing for a tour of Western Europe when..." She trailed off, her voice becoming quieter. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. "When what?" Victor asked gently. though he was beginning to understand that this story might not have a happy middle chapter. When the political situation changed, Anna said carefully, in 1981, martial law was declared in Poland. Many artists and intellectuals were targeted. My husband was a journalist who had written articles critical of the government. We had to leave everything behind and flee to Austria. The ballroom was completely silent now. This wasn't the light entertainment Victor had planned. This was real life, with real consequences and real pain. We arrived here in Vienna with nothing, Anna continued. No money, no connections, no way to prove our credentials. My husband tried to find work as a translator, but his health was never the same after what happened before we left Poland. She paused, clearly struggling with painful memories. Victor wanted to tell her she didn't have to continue, but something in her expression suggested she needed to tell this story. I tried to find work as a piano teacher or performer, but without proper documentation of my training, and with my limited German at the time, nobody would hire me. We needed money immediately just to eat and pay for a tiny apartment. So I took the only job I could find. What kind of job? Someone in the crowd asked softly. Anna looked directly at Victor. I became a cleaner. First in office buildings, then in hotels like this one. I've been cleaning the Grand Hotel for almost 30 years. The impact of her words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several people gasped. The woman in the blue dress started crying harder. Victor felt like he might be sick. You've been working here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. At this hotel? Anna nodded. I usually work the evening shift, cleaning the offices and meeting rooms after events like this. Tonight I finished early and... She glanced around the beautiful ballroom. I've cleaned this room hundreds of times, but I've never seen it during an event. I wanted to stay and listen to the music just for a few minutes. Victor closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of what he had done. This woman had been invisible to him and everyone else in this room. She had spent decades cleaning up after their parties and meetings, and none of them had ever really seen her as a person. I hid in the corner because I didn't want to disturb anyone, Anna continued. I know I don't belong here with all these important people, but when I heard you playing, it brought back so many memories of when I used to perform. I couldn't help myself. I had to stay and listen. The crowd was stunned into complete silence. Victor looked around at the faces of his wealthy, influential audience. Many of them looked ashamed, as if they were suddenly seeing their own behavior in a new light. Anna, Victor said, his voice stronger now, filled with something that sounded like determination. You said you used to perform your own recitals? She nodded. Every month in Warsaw. Always sold out. People would travel from other cities to hear me play. But that was a lifetime ago. Victor stepped closer to the piano. Would you honor us with another piece? Anna looked surprised. Oh, I couldn't. I've already taken up too much of your time. But the crowd immediately began encouraging her. Please, just one more. We want to hear more. Anna looked around at all the eager faces, and for the first time since she had started telling her story, she smiled. Anna looked around the room at all the expectant faces. The fear and hesitation from earlier had melted away, replaced by something Victor hadn't seen before. A quiet confidence that seemed to come from deep within her soul. If you really want me to play again, she said softly, then I will. But this time I want to play something special, something I haven't played in over 20 years. She returned to the piano bench, and once again that transformation occurred. Her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed, and suddenly she wasn't just Anna, the hotel cleaner, anymore. She was Anna the artist, the performer who had once captivated audiences across Poland. This piece, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, was my husband's favorite. I played it for him on our wedding day and again on the night before we left Warsaw forever. Victor felt a chill run down his spine. He could see the emotion building in Anna's face, and he knew that whatever she was about to play would be something extraordinary. Anna's hands found the keys again, and she began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. But this wasn't the first movement that most people knew. She started with the gentle, haunting melody that everyone recognized, but then something magical happened. As she played, it became clear that Anna wasn't just performing the notes on the page. She was telling the story of her life through the music. The gentle opening reminded everyone of young love, of peaceful evenings and dreams for the future. Victor found himself thinking about the young woman Anna must have been, full of hope and talent, planning a career that would take her across Europe. The crowd was completely mesmerized. People who had been checking their phones earlier were now standing perfectly still, afraid to breathe too loudly and disturb the spell Anna was weaving. As the first movement flowed into the second, the music became more complex, more urgent. Victor realized that Anna was playing all three movements as one continuous piece, something that required not just technical skill but incredible emotional stamina. The second movement danced and sparkled, full of joy and celebration. Victor could imagine Anna in her prime, taking her bows after successful concerts, feeling the rush of applause and appreciation. But underneath the happiness, there were hints of something darker coming. Then came the third movement. If anyone in the audience thought they had heard passionate piano playing before, they were wrong. Anna's performance of the final movement was like watching lightning strike. Her hands moved across the keys with fierce intensity, creating a storm of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hotel. This was the sound of a life turned upside down. This was the music of loss, of fear, of having to leave everything you love behind and start over in a strange place where no one knows your name or your worth. Victor watched in amazement as Anna poured decades of suppressed emotion into the piano. Her face showed the strain of the difficult passages, but also a kind of joy that came from finally being able to express everything she had kept locked inside for so long. The music built to an incredible climax, Anna's hands flying across the keys in passages that would challenge even the most skilled professional pianists. But she handled every note with precision and power, her years of training and natural talent shining through despite the decades since her last real performance. As the final notes rang out, Anna sat back on the bench, breathing heavily. The effort had taken everything out of her, but her face showed a satisfaction that Victor had never seen before. It was the look of someone who had just remembered who they really were. The silence that followed lasted even longer than before. Then Victor began to clap slowly and deliberately. One by one, the rest of the audience joined him until the ballroom was once again filled with thunderous applause. But this time was different. This wasn't just appreciation for a good performance. This was recognition of something much deeper, the triumph of the human spirit, the power of art to survive even the worst circumstances. Victor stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Anna," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I owe you an apology. A sincere, heartfelt apology." Anna looked at him with surprise. "An apology? For what?" "For what I did earlier," Victor said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I asked you to play as a joke. I thought I was being clever, giving the crowd a little entertainment at your expense. I had no idea who you really were, what you had accomplished, what you had been through." The crowd murmured their agreement. Many people looked embarrassed, realizing that they too had been ready to laugh at Anna's expense. "I've been performing for most of my adult life," Victor continued, "and I've never heard anything as moving as what you just played. You didn't just perform that music, you lived it, you felt it, you made it part of your soul." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what it means to me to hear that." Victor's agent stepped forward, his phone already in his hand. "Anna," he said urgently, "I've been recording the last few minutes. With your permission, I'd like to post this online. The world needs to hear your story." Anna looked uncertain. "I don't know if anyone would be interested in hearing about an old woman who used to play piano." "Are you kidding?" said the woman in the blue dress who had been crying throughout both performances. "Your story is incredible. You're incredible." Other people in the crowd began to speak up. "You're more talented than most of the pianists we pay hundreds of dollars to hear. Your story needs to be told. This is the most moving performance I've ever witnessed." Victor felt a sudden inspiration. "Anna," he said, "I have concerts scheduled in Vienna, Budapest, and Prague over the next 3 months." "Oh." Anna's eyes went wide. "Guest artist, me? But I haven't performed professionally in decades. I don't have the right clothes or sheet music or—" "We'll take care of all of that," Victor interrupted. "What you have is something that can't be bought or taught. You have a connection to the music that comes from living a full life, from experiencing both joy and sorrow, from understanding what it means to lose everything and still find reasons to keep going." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People were shouting, "Yes," and "Do it." Anna looked overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. Victor's agent was already making phone calls, talking rapidly to someone about recording contracts and concert bookings. Other people in the crowd were exchanging contact information, talking about starting a fund to help Anna, discussing ways to share her story with the world. But in the middle of all the excitement, Victor noticed that Anna had grown quiet. She was looking around the room with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Anna?" he said gently. "Are you all right?" She turned to him with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I never thought I would play for an audience again," she said softly. "For 30 years I cleaned this ballroom after your concerts and events, listening to the echoes of music and remembering what it felt like to be on the other side of that piano. Tonight you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue someone had handed her. "You gave me back my voice." 3 months later, Victor stood backstage at the Vienna concert hall, adjusting his bow tie and listening to the buzz of excitement from the packed auditorium. But tonight wasn't about him. Tonight was about Anna. The video of Anna's performance at the charity gala had spread across the internet like wildfire. Within a week, it had been viewed millions of times. News stations picked up the story. Newspapers wrote articles about the hidden maestro who had worked as a cleaner for 30 years while possessing world-class talent. The response had been overwhelming. People from around the globe sent messages of support and admiration. Musicians offered to collaborate with her. Record companies called with contract offers. But most importantly, ordinary people shared their own stories of hidden dreams and lost opportunities. Inspired by Anna's courage to reclaim her artistic voice, Victor peeked through the curtain at the audience. Every seat was filled. He recognized some faces from the charity gala, but most were new. People who had heard Anna's story and traveled from across Europe just to witness her return to the concert stage. In the front row sat Anna's daughter and granddaughter, who had flown in from Chicago. They had lost touch with Anna's musical past over the years, knowing her only as the hardworking woman who had sacrificed everything to give them a better life. Now they were about to see their mother and grandmother as the artist she had always been inside. 5 minutes, Mr. Petrov," called the stage manager. Victor nodded, then walked to Anna's dressing room. He knocked gently and heard her soft voice say, "Come in." Anna sat in front of the mirror wearing an elegant black evening gown that had been donated by a famous designer who had seen the viral video. Her gray hair was styled beautifully, and she wore simple pearl earrings that had been a gift from her late husband decades ago. But despite looking every inch the professional pianist, Victor could see the nervousness in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Anna took a deep breath. "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "It's been so long since I performed for a real audience. What if I forget the music? What if my hands shake? What if people expect too much?" Victor smiled. "Anna, 3 months ago you played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata with such power and emotion that grown men cried. You haven't lost that ability. It's still inside you waiting." "But that was different," Anna said. "That was spontaneous from the heart. This feels so formal, so planned." Victor understood her fear. The magic of that night at the charity gala had seemed to come from nowhere, born from years of suppressed longing and the shock of unexpected opportunity. Could that same magic be recreated on demand? "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Victor asked. "You said I had given you back your voice. Well, tonight isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about using that voice to share your story, your music, your heart with people who need to hear it." Anna nodded slowly, her confidence beginning to return. "You're right. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest." There was a knock at the door. 2 minutes. Victor stood up and offered Anna his arm. "Shall we?" Together they walked toward the stage. Victor could hear the murmur of conversation from the audience, punctuated by the occasional burst of excited laughter. The energy in the hall was electric. They reached the wings and Victor could see the beautiful grand piano sitting center stage under the bright lights. It was the same model as the one at the charity gala, chosen specifically to help Anna feel comfortable. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice over the sound system, "please welcome to the stage Victor Petrov and Anna Kowalski." The applause was immediate and thunderous. Victor led Anna onto the stage, and the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation before she had even played a single note. Anna looked overwhelmed by the reception, her hand pressed to her heart. Victor approached the microphone. "Thank you," he said, waiting for the applause to die down. "3 months ago, I made a mistake that taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. I learned that talent and artistry can be found in the most unexpected places, and that assumptions about people based on their circumstances can blind us to extraordinary gifts." He gestured toward Anna. "Tonight, you will hear one of the most remarkable pianists of our time. But more than that, you will witness the triumph of the human spirit, the power of art to survive and flourish even under the most difficult circumstances." Anna stepped forward to the piano, and the audience settled into expectant silence. She adjusted the bench, tested the pedals, and placed her hands above the keys. For just a moment, Victor saw a flash of the old uncertainty in her eyes. But then something wonderful happened. From somewhere in the audience, a child's voice called out, "We believe in you." Anna smiled, and suddenly all the nervousness seemed to melt away. She looked out at the sea of supportive faces and remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection or technical brilliance. It was about connection, about sharing something beautiful with other human beings. She began to play. The program opened with Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she had planned to perform during her interrupted European tour 40 years earlier. As the first notes filled the concert hall, Victor felt the same chill he had experienced at the charity gala. Anna's playing was even more powerful now, refined by months of practice but still carrying that raw emotional truth that had stunned everyone that first night. The audience was completely captivated. Unlike the distracted crowd at the charity event, these people had come specifically to hear Anna play, and they listened with the attention her music deserved. Victor watched faces in the crowd and saw expressions of wonder, joy, and deep emotional connection. Anna moved through the program with growing confidence. She played Mozart with crystalline precision, Debussy with impressionistic beauty, and Bach with architectural perfection, but it was her interpretation of Schumann's Scenes from Childhood that truly brought the house down. As she played the simple, tender melodies that evoked memories of innocence and wonder, Anna seemed to be sharing not just the composer's memories but her own. Victor thought about her granddaughter in the front row, about all the children around the world who would hear this recording someday and be inspired to pursue their own dreams. The final piece of the evening was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, with Victor conducting a chamber orchestra that had volunteered their services for the concert. It was an ambitious choice, technically demanding and emotionally exhausting, but Anna rose to the challenge magnificently. The concerto became a conversation between piano and orchestra, with Anna leading the musical dialogue with authority and grace. The famous melody soared above the orchestral accompaniment, and Victor found himself conducting with tears in his eyes. As the final chords rang out, the audience exploded into the most enthusiastic applause Victor had ever heard. People were standing, cheering, crying, and calling out, "Bravo!" in multiple languages. Anna stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had done it. After 30 years of cleaning concert halls and dreaming of this moment, she was back where she belonged. Victor joined her at center stage, and they took their bows together. As they did, he whispered to her, "Thank you for teaching me that the most beautiful music comes not from technical perfection, but from a life fully lived." Anna smiled through her tears. "And thank you for giving me the chance to share my story. Sometimes the most important performances happen when we least expect them." The applause continued long after they left the stage, and Victor knew that this night would be remembered not just as Anna's triumphant return, but as a reminder that extraordinary gifts can be found in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone to recognize their worth. Bien.